So our water is going to be a limited resource in many areas. So we really need to focus on the idea of water conservation, especially with water conservation just being integral to our water management, because it's just extremely important, the idea that when we think about water management, we think about water conservation, because it's just going to be limited, and the problem, especially in the western United States, is just probably going to get worse and worse in terms of limited amounts of water. So we really want to be efficient with what water we have and use it in the best way possible and save it as much as we can. So one of the first ways we can look at that is minimum irrigation practices. So really using the only the amount of water that we need to maintain tree health, growth, and appearance, and using the most efficient application methods we can. Now, in a lot of places, you're not going to get that choice, right? We talked about the idea that there's a lot of places that are already set up with sprinkler systems, and we're just going to have to figure it out from there. But we can really look at, the head size, the length of time, the width of the spray. We can do all those things to really try and make our application even more efficient than it can be. We really have to understand water budgets, so understand the idea of plant and soil water loss through evapotranspiration, water holding capacity of our soil, application rates, infiltration rates, irrigation system efficiency, and the effect of our environmental conditions as well. One of the ways we can really help in terms of water conservation, especially in areas where water is extremely limited, is through xeriscaping. So xeriscaping is doing drought-tolerant landscaping, which is just really the idea of putting in drought-tolerant plants in places where you're not going to have a lot of water. And it's just, in my mind, it's a great idea. It's really getting into that idea that we discussed before about site-species relationships and really putting the right trees and the right plants in the right areas. And it's just kind of fundamental to put, drought-tolerant plants in a drought-tolerant landscape. You can use native or non-native. I myself prefer native, but that's just the type of person I am. Because I just really think the trees that should be there are the ones that are going to grow best there. Some plants will exhibit drought adaptations, so things like smaller and thicker leaves, waxy cuticles, leaf pubescence, stunted stomata, deep root systems, dry season dormancy. There's all sorts of examples, but there's at least some of them. What does xeriscaping look like? You've probably seen it before. There's definitely places in Bakersfield that have it, but the idea that you're just going to, in areas where you don't get a lot of water, find plants like century plant, agave, cacti, things like that really do well in these water limited places, and we're going to plant those things instead of things like grass or large trees that need lots of water. Our next way that we're going to really try and make sure to conserve water is through hydrozoning. So we're going to group our plants that we plant in certain areas, or group our trees together according to their water requirements. So that way we could spend a lot of water in one place, but then a little water in another place. And it's kind of a smart idea. So each group or hydrozone is going to be irrigated separately. That's going to minimize our water use, allow us to conserve water, give the plants exactly what they need. Kind of a great idea. If you've got fruit and veggie trees, going to need a lot of water. You get some drought-tolerant trees and plants in another place, so that's not going to need as much water. And one thing that's going to be really important as something to incorporate is indicator plants. So your indicator plants are plants that are going to signal when water is needed, because it's a species that exhibits reversible symptoms of drought stress, like temporary wilting. So not permanent, not to where it's a problem, but temporary to where it's like, okay, that plant doesn't look good. This whole thing needs more water. So that's really important to have that indicator species where you're like, uh-oh, look at that guy. All right, I gotta fix this problem. Here's just a look at what it could be like. So here we got A, B, C, D. D, we got G, we got H, we got K, we got F, we got M, we got all these different places. Here's our actual buildings, Unit A and Unit B. So these areas are going to be grouped together. These ones are going to the B's here are going to be grouped together. All these trees here in C, they'll be grouped together. And so you're trying to just make sure to water these certain places a certain way, because they're going to have the different species in them and the different water requirements. And it's all just doing our best to minimize waste of water, really. We want to use water, but we want to use it in the best way so we have plenty of it for as long as possible. Mulch. Mulch is absolutely a fantastic water conservation technique. It isn't much more than the idea of, well, we're going to put some mulch around the tree. Yeah, it's actually a fantastic idea. It's going to improve your soil structure and your infiltration rates, because mulch holds water really well. It's going to reduce your soil moisture evaporation, because now you've got that organic matter. So that's really what mulch is. It's just an organic matter and a big addition of organic matter. So you've got this big addition of organic matter sitting on top of your soil, so it's going to reduce your soil moisture evaporation. It's going to moderate your soil temperature. It's going to limit your weed competition, because they can't, the weeds can't get in there because they can't get down to the soil. That's also going to then further reduce your evaporation and soil water loss, because you don't have that competition. Reduces your soil compaction and erosion, because now the water is working its way through the organic matter. And then what's actually happening is, instead of that water, if you're getting too much water hitting the ground, instead of hitting the ground and making little rills and channels and having all sorts of erosion issues, now all that water is just getting soaked up in that organic matter and just getting soaked up in that mulch. And then it's still going to become available for the soil. It's fantastic. Here's a look at it, similar to what we saw with the drip system. So you put your mulch. You don't really want to cover that root collar. We've talked about that, the root collar down here, the lower part of the trunk, that little part where we get the taper. We don't really want to cover that up, but we want to cover up where we think the roots are. Usually they're going to mulch to the end of the drip line of the tree. We know the roots are probably farther, but we can't really cover this whole thing in mulch. So we're going to at least go to the drip line of the tree, because that way all that, some of that water that was intercepted, maybe that'll work its way down eventually, and then that gets captured by the organic matter as well again. And, love the fact that organic matter retains water, because it's hugely important. And it's a big reason why mulch is an absolutely fantastic way to help conserve water on our trees. Organic mulches have the added benefit of increasing soil organic matter, because that's really what they are as they decompose. So that's going to enhance your soil biology, your fertility, and your structure. It also provides your landscape with side benefits, like it's going to be a well-kept appearance. It does a really great job of reducing trimmer and lawnmower damage to trees, because they can't get right up on the trees, which is actually a huge deal, because just at least on my walks through Northwest Bakersfield, around where I live, the amount of lawnmower damage is, and whether it's lawnmower damage specifically or weed whacker damage, it's atrocious, the amount that happens. And these trees, some of these trees almost look girdled, because you've got mowers trying to get right up on them. And if they had a little bit of mulch, they'd be just mowing around the mulch, not getting up on the tree. And that protects the tree and gives it all these water conservation benefits and soil biology, fertility, and structure enhancements. I mean, mulch is fantastic. Common types of mulch: leaves, grass clippings, wood chips, peat moss, bark chips, pine needles, straw, which down when I lived in the southeast, that was all you used as mulch, was just pine needles everywhere, just tons and tons of pine needles. Rice hulls and nutshells also make for a good mulch. Flooding. So when your soil moisture content is above field capacity, water is going to move down through the macropores in response to gravity. That's that infiltration. That's our gravitational water. That's going to be fast or slow depending on the soil's physical characteristics, which we talked about before: texture, structure, bulk, density, depth, and how many layers you've got. Your soils with slow rates of percolation are going to be poorly drained soils. And in poorly drained soils, the waters can occupy the macropore space for extended periods of time, which is going to restrict your air movement. And remember, the pore space, our best soils are going to be half air and half water. So if all your pore space is flooded with water, it's very bad for your soil. And if it's very bad for your soil, it's very bad for your trees. So I don't think I really needed to put a picture of flooding, but what I really want you to think about with this picture of flooding, besides how awful it is for the people who have to live in that neighborhood, is to start thinking about what it looks like for that tree and these trees in this picture, and what is actually happening to these trees, and are they used to this? If they're not used to this, how does the tree deal with it or cope with it? And the thing is, flooding can be extremely damaging to trees because of the lack of oxygen. So the anaerobic conditions that are created from the lack of oxygen, the air that's supposed to be in those macropores is suffocating your roots. It's changing the chemical composition of the essential elements that are trying to be taken up by the roots. It can lead to fermentation in the root cells and buildup of toxic compounds. It can create mineral toxicities. Your lack of oxygen also harms the living components of the soil ecosystem. And basically it comes down to the longer the flooding occurs, the longer the excess water remains, the more the tree health is going to deteriorate. A few hours of flooding, photosynthesis is going to stop, transpiration is going to slow down, and some soil organisms are going to be killed, which is not good because all of these organisms combine together to do wonderful things in our soil. If you get several days of flooding, you get root loss happening in most species, and if your conditions persist for longer than days, you're starting to look into species decline and then species death, even depending on how long the flooding occurred. Now, there are species that are definitely adapted to flooding because they live in floodplains, or they're right there on the borders of rivers or lakes. So if you know your area is going to be subject to flooding, you really want to make sure, once again, back down to that idea of species-site relationships and planting the right things in the right areas, because it's absolutely crucial to what we do. Drainage. Drainage is absolutely important in terms of water conservation, and we really want to make sure to prevent drain problems. So it's really important to consider the grade and drainage flow pattern during construction or landscape development. That's really your easiest time to fix the problem or fix any problems with drainage. Once everything's kind of put in place, it becomes a lot more effort, a lot more money spent trying to really fix those problems afterwards. It's best to try and do it during construction or landscape development when you're setting everything up. You really want to avoid the creation of low spots where water can accumulate or drain really slowly, because that then gets right back into that issue of flooding. And if your site's not already developed, adjusting the grade, the amount of slope that you have, that's what your grade is the first choice to avoiding drainage problems. So how are we going to improve drainage? Well, one thing we can do is use drain tiles. Drain tiles are usually made of clay or concrete or plastic. Plastic is most commonly used for landscape purposes. In my mind, clay would be the best because just the more natural you get, the better off. But it really depends on your situation and what else you have going on in the soils. And plastic, the reason why plastic is most commonly used is it just kind of gives you that, for lack of a better term, flexibility and just more multi-purpose than the other ones. Changing your grade or trenching or managing your subsurface flow is going to be important in terms of improving drainage, but you really have to take care not to damage the root systems of existing trees when you're going to go down into the soil and trying to improve drainage that way. You can amend soils, usually with organic materials. You can try and improve your irrigation efficiency. We mentioned it before with irrigation, how sometimes you can actually help improve the soil with the way that you irrigate, but you can also ruin the soil if you're not, irrigating in the correct way. And then really important way to improve drainage is to channel any runoff. So the overland flow, so we talked about infiltration, about the water going into the soil. If we have any water that's not going into the soil and we're creating a lot of runoff, or we get a lot of water erosion, or any of those rills, channels, those little things showing up, we really don't want that to happen. So we want to really make sure that we have some sort of a drainage system that takes that water and puts it in the right place. And so here's just kind of an example of drainage tiles. So here's our tree. It's planted. We've got our soil fill here. We've got some vertical tiles, but then we also have our 6-inch drain tiles down here, so that we can really try and get water to get and drain right through here and get to our roots and then work its way down into the soil. But we don't want water flooding in here, because that wouldn't do us any good. So we basically set up layers of soil artificially that are basically going to help us get the drainage that we're looking for. And that's what I got for you. So that's quite a bit, but water management's super important. So hope you liked it.